Hey, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. You're listening to the longest running superhero role playing game on Earth. I'm your host, the Game Master, and in this one, we're going to talk a little bit about a Marvel comic book from 2004 that was called New X-Men Academy X. And this takes place after Grant Morrison's run on X-Men Volume 2, which was called New X-Men, which I hated. I believe the art was by Ethan Van Sciver, and I liked what he would do later with the Green Lantern stuff, where I think he's the guy who invented like the Red Lantern Corps and the Blue Lantern Corps and all that jazz, like I thought that was really cool. And it's not my favorite look, when it comes to comic book art, but I thought it was okay. But you go back to what EVS did on X-Men, and I just despise it. I thought it was ugly. I hated it. And I feel like that whole era of X-Men, like when Cyclops hooked up with Emma Frost, for me, any of the love that I had towards the X-Men characters in the 90s was like I loved the X-Men animated series. I was buying all the Toy Biz action figures and stuff like that. All of that goodwill, I feel like, got killed by Grant Morrison. And that's just me. Obviously, if you like it, more power to you. I'm never telling anybody else what they should or should not like. But I'm just sharing my feelings. I despised it. I hated that whole era. I hated their ugly striped shirts. Everybody was wearing kind of like a striped turtleneck kind of thing. I just thought it was god awful, right? And and so then when this came out, when they did Academy X, I was really, really into it. And if I remember correctly, the creative team there was Craig Kyle and Chris Yost. And I felt like it was sort of a return to form. You know what I mean? The stuff that I had loved about the 90s X-Men, or about the other kind of surrounding teams like Generation X. In a way, this to me felt like if you took Generation X and you just expanded it to be like an entire college campus, which is always where I wanted to see it go, anyways. So for anybody that was not familiar with this era, I'm gonna do kind of I'm literally on Wikipedia right now. I'm just gonna name off some characters that were here. Um, to sort of let certain people know what era we're talking about. Okay. So they had a guy named Elixir, whose real name was Josh Foley, and he was a healer. And then there was a character named Icarus, who was Jay Guthrie, and he could fly and sing hypnotically, and he had a healing factor. Prodigy was David. Uh, I hope I'm pronouncing this. Elaine, uh, Alleyne. I'm not sure how to pronounce a lot of these names. When I'm reading the comic, you just see it written out. You never hear it spoken aloud. Um, Surge, she was actually a really big deal in our campaign. Her real name is Noriko Ashita. Again, I apologize if I'm butchering pronunciations. But she was a Japanese girl with electrical powers. And the irony is, my wife had made an almost completely identical character like a hot minute before this comic came out, just by sheer coincidence, right? And her character was named Denki. So we had kind of retconned Denki to be the clone of Surge. And then Wallflower, she was a huge character in our game. She had pheromones. She had, blonde hair, blue eyes. If I remember correctly, her costume was white and gold. I really liked Wallflower. I thought she was awesome. Wind Dancer was cool. She was from Venezuela. Her real name was Sophia Mantega. Wither, Kevin Ford. He reminded me of another character from our game that was an original character of ours, named Plague, where both of them would have like cell rot, where whatever they touch, dies. Um, And then there was Dust. Again, I hope I don't butcher the pronunciation. To me, I in my head, I always said Suraya Quadir. I hope that's right. She was from Afghanistan. She could turn herself into like kind of a whirlwind of dust. Hellion, aka Julian Keller, had telekinesis. Mercury, Cicely Kincaid, I thought she was really cool. She was kind of like the T-1000. Rock Slide, aka Santo Vaccaro. He to me was another Ben Grimm, but he was gray rock instead of orange rock. And I've seen actual orange rocks now, but I remember as a kid, I had never seen an orange rock before. So that was always so strange to me that Ben Grimm was orange. And I'm like, why didn't they make him gray? So that little part of my brain, kind of was like, hey, rock slide. It's finally gray Ben Grimm. Spectre was Dallas Gibson. Tag was Brian Cruz. Um, Bogart was Robin Wise. Naiad or Orly Sabayan. I'm probably butchering these. I'm going to forget about the alter egos. Pinpoint, Troval, Umbra, Xenon, Anol, Indra, Hidego, Loa, Network, Rubbermaid. I always thought there should be a character named Rubbermaid. Bling, Flubber, Fox, Onyx, Rainboy, Dryad, Quill. We had a character named Quill too. Um, 3 and 1. We actually had to change that because that's the Stepford Cuckoos, who are clones of Emma Frost, and we had more than three of them. But we did have the Stepford Cuckoos running around in our game. Armor, Blindfold, Wing, DJ, Match, Pixie. I love Pixie. I think she's awesome. Um, she's very fairy like. Trance, Wolf Club, Preview. At any rate, you get the gist there, right? So for anyways, for me, as far as I knew, it was the first time I saw just a massive number of mutants at the school. I always thought that it was like, I think for me the biggest group I remember seeing was the one where it was like Storm, Nightcrawler, Colossus, Wolverine, um Thunderbird, Banshee, like the giant size X-Men #1 crowd. Um and even then, that pales in comparison to how many there were here. So we ran it as college, that it was the first day of college is how we handled it. And so it was all about moving into the dorms. Oh, I left out like the two most important characters. Holy crap. So my wife is 6 years younger than I am. So I graduated in 1994. She was supposed to graduate in the year 2000, but her mom got really sick. Her mom had a bad heart and actually would die a couple years after this, from related problems from that. But so my wife had to drop out of school for a little while and ended up getting her GED and stuff like that. And then she always wanted to go to college, and then she never went to college. And so part of what I was doing when I was running this game for her was I was trying to give her like the college experience. I know that probably sounds lame, but she was really, really into it, and there was stuff she didn't know about college, or like, what does it feel like to be in this situation? Or what are some of the tropes of being like an incoming freshman, and so on and so forth. And so she, I guess that's why I started to say she was a little younger than me. So whereas I grew up on the 90s X-Men cartoon that they recently brought back and now they call it X-Men 97, that was my X-Men, right? For my wife, she grew up on X-Men Evolution. And her two favorite characters from that show were Kitty Pryde and Nightcrawler. And so my wife shipped them. She thought those two needed to end up together. She wanted them to have kids and, the whole thing. So in our game, that's what we did. Whereas in traditional Marvel comics, they have Kitty Pryde hook up with Colossus, we didn't do that, and it was because we never really said who Kitty or Colossus had ended up with at this point in our timeline, because a lot of our games, the focus was on our original characters we made up, and it was really less of a focus on the famous DC and Marvel characters themselves. But so at any rate, I was like, that's fine, since you're into it, we'll say that's the case. And so Kitty Pryde often went by the name Shadowcat, so therefore my wife made a daughter of these two named Nightcat. It was kind of a mashup of their two names. And so that was the concept, is Nightcat was the main character for this campaign, and she goes to the Xavier School. And we kind of said that back in the 60s, with the Cuban Missile Crisis, we had borrowed a lot at one point from X-Men First Class, and said, this was originally a home, and then it got turned into a school. And so then we had said that over the years they kept adding to it. So like during the Generation X era of the 90s, we said it here. Generation X was not supposed to take place here, but that's how we did it. We said they were always building onto it, and there were more buildings than there are in the comics up until this point, because when they did these comics in 2004, they finally did say, no, 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 it is a campus. It's an entire campus. There's a bunch of buildings here. And pretty much all the X-Men from through the years were teachers. And I thought that was pretty cool too. So we did the exact same thing. And so Nightcat shows up for the first day of school, and they have a welcome thing they're doing, and they are giving her kind of like little pamphlets and stuff like that, and they're doing the thing of different places in Westchester. And the way we ran it was, for the most part, the people of Westchester have no idea this is a school for mutants. They just think it's a private university, right? And so if characters show up and they say they're from the Xavier School, everybody just thinks they're ordinary college kids. And at any rate, so the local places, for anybody who's, had the college experience, you probably know what I'm talking about. Your first day, they give you all those coupons and stuff. So, we talked about that, and they're saying this is where your dorm is, and here's your textbooks, and yada, yada, yada. And so Nightcat goes to her dorm, and I made up a character kind of on the fly to be her roommate. And I was like, man, I got to run this character a lot. What do I want this character to be like? Right. And so I had grown up on Spider-Man and his amazing friends. And obviously, Spider-Man and Mary Jane Watson get married, and they have a daughter who is Spider-Girl. We took a lot of stuff from the Spider-Girl comics, actually. So I said, well, who's left over there, right? It's obviously Iceman and Firestar. And on that cartoon, Iceman always had the hots for Firestar, no pun intended. So to me, back in 2004 or whenever this was, I was like, that's perfect. And so just as Nightcat was named after Nightcrawler and Shadowcat, we called her roommate Ice Star. And then she had hot and cold powers, both. And so Nightcat, my wife made the call that she would start off, and she has kind of a character arc where her personality changes. And I guess you would say that the arc is that she comes out of her shell, right? So she starts off very shy and introverted, and she ends up much more confident and stuff like that. Um, which you can probably tell by kind of how she's emoting in the artwork I used this week. That's based more on how she ends up, right? Where she's, to be really frank, she's a little more of a bad girl there in the end. Um, but she starts off as more of the good girl stereotype, right? So since she, it's the beginning of the campaign when we're establishing personalities, since she is shy and is a good girl and so on and so forth, I decided that Ice Star would be more of the party girl. And then Ice Star was very outgoing and, hey, let's do jello shots. let's go over to the boys' dorm, it was stuff like that, right? And so I was with Ice Star, I was drawing a lot of inspiration from characters like Michelangelo from Turtles, some of the stuff they did with Beast Boy on Teen Titans, which is ironic because then they get that guy, what's that guy's name? Greg Sipes, I want to say. But they get him then to be another Michelangelo later. So someone else must have noticed similarities there too. You get the gist. And then it was about these two, and it was kind of like an odd couple story, where Ice Star um, would make a mess and not really clean it up. And then Nightcat was the one who was cleaning it up and was like, do you have to make such a mess all the time? Da 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 da. And then the other thing going on, like I mentioned in the last um, game that I uploaded, was the thing that was going on with the John Redbridges, where they had been villains at one point and they had become these they were a massive unwieldy cosmic being, right? That you couldn't run them in games anymore. And so we used the split power, and go check out that video for more information on that. But when the dust settled, there were over 100 John Redbridges now because they'd been split by this villain named Mr. Splits. And so now they went from these like massive, massive cosmic stats to all of their attributes were a 12. They had some powers that were mostly useless. So like they did have a really good memory, and then after they were split, they were having a hard time having enough memory to even remember their own life, you know? Um, so yeah, they had really nothing in the way of powers except for a tiny little amount of precognition. And then even then we said that if one of them is trying to change time, it kind of thwarts what all the others are trying to do. So even the precognition was useless, right? So at the end of the day, it's kind of just all their attributes are 12, and then they have skills that are linked to that. So they're very kind of like Batman level characters at this point. So since they were having a hard time adjusting to this completely new power set, we thought, what would be cool is to have them come here too to get a little help with the adjustment and so on and so forth. And another thing we said with all these John Redbridge duplicates or clones or whatever you want to call them all running around was the longer they spend apart having different life experiences, the more they become different people, right? And they're not the same guy anymore. They're more like a whole bunch of brothers. And so one of them met Nightcat, and my wife really, really, well, how do I want to put this? My wife and I hadn't been together very long, and if you've ever had a relationship, we're kind of in the early days of the relationship, you're more what do I want to say it? I don't know how to put this without it sounding kind of insulting in a way, but you're more like into the other person, like you can't get enough of them, you kind of go overboard, so on and so forth. And so back then, it didn't matter what character she was playing, like she was going to hit on my character. You know what I mean? So that's what she did was Nightcrawler, yeah. I hope it's not correct. Nightcrawler, holy crap. Nightcat hit on one of the John Redbridges, um and that was what was making her come out of her shell then, was she started to become comfortable. And the way my wife had played it was she felt weird that she had, blue skin and pointy ears and stuff like that. And so she had felt ugly. And from his point of view, he likes exotic stuff like blue skin and all that. So he was into it. And so then she starts to feel attractive, and then she starts to dress a little different. I remember my wife was drawing a lot of art of her at the time where she'd basically start off by drawing Kitty Pryde from X-Men Evolution with that haircut. And then she'd add the pointy ears, and then she'd, color her in like Nightcrawler, of course. Um, but I think Hot Topic was like a brand new thing at the time. And by the way, real quick, so my wife, when I met her, she was kind of goth slash punk, you know what I mean? And the longer she was married, she started to wear, because like when I met her, she's like, "Oh, I hate the color pink." Well, now these days, it's my wife's favorite color. And my wife now is like a girly girl and she's always calling herself a trad wife and stuff like that, wants to cook for me and bake cookies and da 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 da. You get the idea. So those are kind of the two sides of my wife's personality. And you might be wondering, why am I talking about that? Well, because that has an effect on the character she's playing, right? So then Nightcat, those were sort of the two halves of her personality too. But in the case of the character, it gets reversed, where she starts off as more wearing pink, very pure, very sweet and stuff like that, right? And then the longer the character went on, the more she's like, I'm gonna wear a little schoolgirl outfit for date night, and da 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 da. And and like I said, Hot Topic was, I think, a brand new store around the time we were doing this, or if it had existed, we didn't have them in our area. Um, and my wife was like really, really into Hot Topic when it first opened, and so she would put Nightcat in like short little plaid skirts with like a white kind of a dress shirt thing with a little tie and stuff. But then like the belt would be like some chains or something, and she'd have like um knee-high fishnets or something, and whatever those glossy black shoes are called, or those saddle shoes. I don't even know what to call them. And then like her ears, she gave her like a bunch of earrings like going all the way up the ear, and she gave her like a nose ring and stuff like that. She started wearing like more lipstick and makeup and things like that. She came out of her shell. And then all the while we had other characters running around like Wallflower. And so one of the stories we did was Wallflower's pheromones would mean that Nightcat's boyfriend was kind of digging on Wallflower then. And so then Nightcat hated Wallflower, even though Wallflower couldn't shut her powers off and stuff like that. And she became really good friends with Surge, that was the Japanese girl with the electrical powers. She kind of became the third in their group of Surge, Nightcat, and Ice Star. But yeah, we basically played out their first year of school. So it wasn't like a single adventure or anything. It was a lot of adventures. And I thought it was really, really cool. I liked it. And for us, every fall, like when we see back to school stuff in the stores, that kind of makes us nostalgic for this. And we'll dust off the X-Men stuff and we'll play it again. Um, and yeah, Nightcat ended up marrying that specific John Redbridge, and then they had kids. They had a daughter who then became the next Nightcat, you know, um, Nightcat 2. And and then interestingly enough, I think it's because enough time went by. My wife had been married so long, she kind of mellowed out, you know. Nightcat 2 doesn't really have any of that bad girl stuff her mom had going on. Nightcat 2 is like sweet 24/7, you know. And then she always had crushes on boys, and I don't think we've ever seen that work out. I don't remember a time in game where yeah, anything serious happened there. I remember she really had a crush. I made this one guy who was he was based on Inigo Montoya from The Princess Bride. And when I made his name, he had I think he had the last name Montoya, but then I think we were using aspects of the name of Ramirez from Highlander. And then I think the third character that got thrown into the mix is I was doing a impression of Puss in Boots from Shrek. And Man, my wife loved that character, and I remember her hitting on him. I don't think they've ever hooked up or anything, but I could be wrong. I'll have to ask my wife. She's away on a trip right now. She's not around for me to ask her, but I'll have to ask her if they ever did get together. I don't think so though. But yeah, that's pretty much it for this one. Um, it was a good era, and like I said, it was one of the very few comic books of this time period that I thought was any good at all. And this is this is around the time I just walked away from comics cold turkey, but this one was good. So credit where credit is due. I'll say this, in the actual comic books, they introduce all these characters that I love, and then they kill a bunch off, and it was kind of that whole George R. R. Martin Game of Thrones kind of thing. I hated that. In our game world, we did not do that. There were in the comics, it was stuff like guys with wings were getting their wings cut off and stuff like that. I didn't do that at all. I didn't have the heart to. So we had our versions of the characters alive and well long after Marvel did. So I'll just throw that out there. But yeah, I think that's it for this one. I hope that you enjoyed this one. If so, we'd love it if you took a moment of your time to smash like, check to see if you're still subscribed, and as always, leave us a comment. And from everybody here at the longest running superhero role playing game on earth, we hope you have a good one, and we'll see you in the next adventure.